Okay.
Hey, good morning, everyone. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes, but if everyone wants to drop their name and where they're joining from in the chat, we'd love to know where everyone's joining from. Minnesota, Vancouver, awesome. We're going to give it 1 more minute. Just a quick note, this is being recorded, so if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to drop. We'll send out the recording. Okay, so it's 12:02, so we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is the ABCs of Allyship event. We have partnered with the ERG Leadership Alliance to bring you this amazing content, so we're really excited for this morning's session. Before we get started, I did want to introduce myself briefly. I'm Aimee Broadhurst. I am the co-founder and CMO of Chezi. Before I pass it over to Aimee, our guest speaker, I did want to take a second to just introduce our company to those of you who may be unfamiliar. So my brother Toby and I started Chezi in June of 2020 after a couple of years of us working in corporate America and having our own experiences as Black Nigerian immigrants in the workplace. We originally launched Chezi as a Glassdoor for minorities, where we were gathering, stories from diverse professionals and sharing them with job seekers in order for them to make more informed career decisions. And while we found that to be very impactful, it became challenging for us to organically get these stories and to scale that business. So in March of this year, we pivoted to, creating a software that helps employee resource group leaders, track and manage their efforts so that they can spend more time doing the work that matters, doing the work that, creates inclusive environments and helps to retain diverse talent. In conjunction with that, we also launched an ERG community where we invite ERG leaders and DEI managers like yourselves to come have conversations, to share best practices, to share helpful resources, etc. After this call, I will send out more information on our platform as well as ERG Leadership Alliance, just so you can get more familiar with us. So now that I'm done with that kind of shameless plug, I want to get back to our content for today. I'm going to pass it over to our guest speaker, Aimee Broadhurst. She's the founder and CEO of Inclusive Space and vice chair of the ERG Leadership Alliance. Before I pass it over to Aimee, just a quick note, you can enable the live transcript. There should be a button at the bottom of your screen that says live transcript, and you can enable that and it'll give you subtitles at the bottom of your screen. Also, this is being recorded, so again, if you're uncomfortable with that in any way, feel free to drop it and we'll send out the recording after this. Aimee is going to share a presentation, and then at the end we will do a Q&A with the audience. While she's presenting, feel free to drop any questions in the chat and we can get to them. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Aimee. Aimee, again, thank you for being here. Excited for your presentation.
It is awesome to be here. I'm very excited about this. Allyship is kind of my thing. And so I really get excited about having conversations about this. So I'll start with just a little bit about me. I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of my ally journey and how I came to be an ally, specifically an ally for the LGBTQ plus community. So these are some pictures to kind of give you an essence of who I am. I am a wife. That is my husband down here in the bottom here. Love is love. That is the two of us at the Woodlands Pride Festival, which was, that started about 2 years ago in our community. That is one of my Christmas trees. When we want to turn that Christmas tree on in our family, we say, turn on the gay tree, and the tree lights up with Alexa. And I am also a mom. My two daughters are here on the left, Lauren and Kennedy. The picture of the woman here underneath them, that is my mom. And my mom passed away several years ago, but my mom is a big reason why I am an ally. And she taught me that it was my role to speak up for those who were marginalized or have no voice. And then a big reason that I'm an ally is because of the two women on either side of me in the middle picture. Those are my two sisters, Christine Kelly. I also have a stepsister, Louisa, and all of my sisters are gay. So I like to say I'm the only straight one in the family. And I became an ally because of my sisters. I saw what was happening with them when they both came out to me. It was not an event as far as I was surprised or anything like that. I think where I went immediately was, what's going to happen to them? How is this going to make their life more difficult? And what can I do to change that? I'm also, as far as an ally, I don't eat at Chick-fil-A. I didn't used to eat at Cracker Barrel until got involved with some folks from Cracker Barrel with their ERGs. And as you can see, I'm sitting in a big LGBTQ plus rocking chair at Out and Equal. I was also the Ally Grand Marshal for Houston Pride. And the picture at the bottom, I refer to that man as my church husband. And he and his husband have 3 kids and just a great group of folks. And we were there my husband and I were there for their wedding in Hawaii a couple years ago. I'm also a published author, the ERG Handbook and the ERG Companion Workbook. I will tell you a cute story that actually happened to me or was told to me last night. My sister Christy, who's there on the right in that middle picture, she and her wife Ginger have 3 children, and her son Zach came up to her last night, and I promise you this happened last night. I couldn't believe it just because I was having this talk today, but Zach came up to his mom last night and he said, so mom, and Zach is like 22. Zach said, Mom, like, what is the deal with Aunt Aimee? And she said, what do you mean? And he said, well, do you feel weird that like she is more gay than you are and she's straight? And my sister said, well, Zach, what do you mean? And he said, well, Mom, she has like rainbow everything on everything. And like, you're not doing that. So do you think you should do more of that? And he said, and why does she do this? And so she explained to her, explained to him what allyship was and kind of what that meant. And that when she and my sister came out to me, that, I realized that their life was going to be potentially different and more difficult, and they wouldn't have the same rights as I have. And that I wanted to make sure that I did something about that. And so she said, Zach, Amy's written a book to help ERGs to be able to help companies to be more diverse and inclusive. And his response was, she is, how did he say it? Oh, she is not essaying around about this. So that's a little bit about who I am and kind of how I got started on this ally journey. So I was with Bank of America for about 23 years. I was in corporate communications for most of my career there. And when I went to a training and I met someone there named James, and he said, we really need somebody to do communications for the LGBT Pride Employee Network. And would you be willing to do that? So I thought about it that night, and we were training the next day. I said yes. And that was my start into the ERG space. And while I was in that space, they then asked me later on if I would be willing to take on a regional role. And then after that, I became the first ally to co-lead the LGBT Pride ERG at the company. So I had my day job. I was leading the employee network. And then I thought, I really have a lot of time, not really, but I decided with a friend of mine, and the picture of those folks, I call them my Bank of America tribe, is in the right-hand corner there. And we decided that it was really important that we start an ally program at the bank. The ally program was specifically focused on LGBTQ plus allyship. I had a conversation with someone in the D&I space, and her comment was, well, everybody needs allies. And I was so singularly focused that I said, well, that's probably true, but this was before marriage equality. This was before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so in my mind, the LGBTQ community, Q plus community, needed allies more than anybody. And we were going to put this program together, as I like to say, from the South, come hell or high water. So we started building this in 2011. We rolled it out in 2013. And this was our model for our ally continuum for the ally program at the bank. And as you'll see, this is very focused on allyship for the LGBTQ plus community. So these are things that you can do as an ally. These are things you can do as an advocate. And these are things that you can do as a champion. So in developing this program, we built a lot of curriculum. One of the pieces of curriculum that we built was your guide to becoming an ally. Now, what you'll notice is that nowhere on here are we specifically saying an ally for LGBTQ plus community, but that was our sole focus. We created this guide, which is where this information, the steps come from. So we had a guide about the steps to becoming an ally. We created stickers, we created tent cards, we created online visibility. So we created a program through SharePoint, and I like to say we did it on shoestrings and bubblegum because we had no budget at that time. So we created a type of portal on SharePoint where people could visually come out as allies, and then we later added visually come out as out at work. And within that program, we morphed that into a much more sophisticated SharePoint site where we were able to show where people were located. And finally, we evolved that into a program that actually the technology group at the bank built, which was an ally engagement portal. And through that portal, people could come in, declare themselves as allies, or declare themselves as out at work. They came in at bronze, and then through training and other things, they were able to move up levels. So they were able to move to silver, gold, and platinum. This was an incredible program. It was and still is a gold standard for ally programs across companies, which I'm very proud of. By the time I left the company, we had over 25,000 visible out allies and out employees that were in the system, and that has continued to grow. I believe at this point they are over 30,000. So all of my journey from allyship really was centered around the LGBTQ plus community. So as things began to change for me was really when things had begun to change for me over time. I experienced something when I was at work where I really needed a male ally as a woman, and that didn't happen for me. And so the first thing I did as soon as that incident happened was I joined the women's ERG at the bank. So I was also part of the women's ERG, and then I was leading LGBT Pride. And I really began to see at that point that male allies for women were really important. Another thing that I began to really kind of get my head around was the fact that allies for women need not just to be men, but women need to be allies for other women. And more specifically, white women need to be allies for women of color. And that's something that I wasn't really seeing happening. And so I began to kind of look at this from the perspective of, you know, what is allyship and how is that different from, you know, we have the ally continuum that I showed you with ally, advocate, and champion. And this was really what everything was based on that we did. But what is a real ally continuum if it's not just focused on LGBT folks? And that's how I kind of evolved into this ABCs of allyship. So the first question I want to ask everybody in the group is, for you, or maybe as an ally yourself, what is an ally? Can you put some stuff in chat for me and let me know what you think the definition of an ally is? So what is an ally? Being in solidarity with marginalized groups, agreed. Any other thoughts on allyship? Well, if you want to look at the term ally actually comes from the Latin verb, which means to bind to, and it's used to describe someone who supports disenfranchised and unrepresented groups of people, such as minorities and those in the LGBTQ plus community. I thought it was really interesting. Oh, another one here, speaking up on behalf of others. An ally is someone who does not gaslight or dismiss claims of disparate treatment, but accepts support and uplifts diverse people, a voice that can speak up when others aren't around to do so. Those are all really great things that allies do. And those happen when people can move from this kind of unawareness, they can move into awareness and then into allyship. So what does that mean? Well, I think the big thing for allies is becoming aware that others may experience the workplace differently than you do. It's kind of a wake-up call for people to become aware of how biases affect the workplace and the work relationships. And that's really the first step in someone becoming aware so that they can then move into becoming an ally. Also, how can ERGs begin the process of educating others into allyship? Well, the first step of that is really, let me move my chat over here, is to really define and communicate what your community needs from potential allies, and then let allies know that they are needed and welcomed. I'll tell you, I was facilitating a session, it was probably about a year ago, and we were talking about allyship, and it was a session kind of similar to this. And we went through this whole session, and one of the things that when we got to the end, one of the things that became very apparent to me were that folks that were on the call had really not thought about what they needed from their allies. They weren't telling their allies they needed them, and they weren't telling their allies they were welcome, and they weren't, most importantly, describing to their allies exactly how they needed them to help. So good allies want to know what's required and what they can do, and they are open to learning. And that's a very important thing to remember about allies. You need to let them know that they're needed. You need to let them know what is required from them, and you need to let them know that they're welcome. Because I will tell you that some people, when it comes to allyship, they want to be allies. They feel like they are allies, but they don't want to feel like they're intruding within the community. And so that's why it's really important to let them know that they're welcome. So as my ally journey has evolved to be more inclusive of other marginalized groups that I now realize that I need to be an ally for, that's really when I started thinking about what are really the ABCs of allyship. Well, the first one, in my opinion, is being an ally. And being an ally is about educating yourself and educating other people about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about seeking out cultural information so that all are able to feel comfortable when you're participating in any type of social gatherings. Also, when you're participating in any types of gatherings at work. An ally needs to set a positive example of support for everyone to see. They need to see coworkers as individuals and help other people do the same. Now, that might sound like a, well, duh, Amy, of course we need to see people as individuals. But I think one of the important things that allies can do is for folks who look at marginalized groups as groups and not necessarily looking at the individual people that are part of those groups, it's really important for people to begin to see people as individuals that are part of the group. Because here's a key. When you can capture someone's heart and mind when it comes to allyship, you have that person as an ally. And it's much easier to capture an individual's heart and mind in many cases than it is to capture a group. So if an ally sees someone as an individual, if an ally sees that they have someone like me in their family who is in need of allies and why that is so, you're going to begin to see people say, oh, okay, well, I now see why I need to be an ally. I want to learn more. And last but not least, an ally really needs to check and recheck how you interpret situations and perceive other people. So once someone's become an ally, the thing that I want people to remember is I think there needs to be some type of ally progression. And that's why I have the ABCs of allyship, because I think it's really important that people not only become allies, but they see that there is room for them to grow as allies. And that's one of the reasons when we designed the ally program at the bank, that we had that progression of people coming in as bronze and then moving. Here are the things that you can do to become silver. Here are the things that you can do to become gold. And here are the things that you can do to become platinum. And after you've become a platinum ally, here are things that you can continue to do to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion for the LGBTQ+ community. So next in the ABCs of allyship would be the backer. So a backer really needs to be someone who is an amplifier. And that is like when you're in a room and perhaps there is someone sitting at the table. So I'll use a Black woman as an example. So there's a Black woman sitting at the table and she contributes to the conversation, and then someone else basically says the same thing, and that person is given credit for that. I think we've all seen this happen in our workplaces. And It's something that we need to make sure that we're aware of as a backer. So you need to be an amplifier. Repeat the message and make sure that you're giving credit to the originator. Help everyone to be heard and respected in the workplace. Be attuned to when an idea is introduced and others are not listening and they're not valuing someone's contribution. You also need to be aware of your own unconscious bias and privilege. I think this is a really hard one for a lot of people because the word privilege has been taken by many people as, well, if I have white privilege, that means that my life wasn't hard, or that means I didn't have to go through things. Well, that's not true. You actually, it means something very differently. And I think it's really important to help people who have privilege to understand that it doesn't mean that they have not had hard things to happen in their life, but it means that who they are and who they show up in the workplace has not been, is not added or has not been a difficulty that has kept them from doing things in their lives. So people have to be aware of their unconscious bias and of their privilege. They've also got to be diligent. You've got to be diligent in working with teams and leaders who value diversity. That's not to say that you're not going to step outside of that, but being able to work and be working with people who have the same values you do doesn't always necessarily mean you're singing to the choir. Sometimes that can be a way that you are regenerating and refreshing yourself and getting some energy you need to then go outside of that group and show up as an ally and do these other things that we're talking about that allies should be able to do. Got a comment here. I often hear white privilege, but the more I learn about it, the more I realize that it is just one version of privilege. That's very true. And that's really an excellent point. And I think that's something important to bring into the conversation when we start talking, when we're talking about allies and allyship. White privilege is one type of privilege, but there are also other kinds of privilege. There are privileges that people are afforded by the type of the family that they come from. There are privileges that are afforded to people because of the fact that perhaps they come from money. So they're all different kinds of privileges, and being able to disseminate and talk about what those privileges are is a very important part of the conversation. So thanks for that comment. That's a great comment. And last but not least, as a mentor, you really need to be, as a backer, you really need to be a mentor, a coach, and an advisor. Look for opportunities to mentor and coach and advise, not just allies, but how can you be that for someone who is, you are being an ally for? How can you be a mentor to someone from an underrepresented group or a marginalized group? And then last but not least, when we're talking about allyship and the ABCs, is the champion. So as you would suspect, the champion has a lot more things that perhaps they're doing, lending your voice and your talents to help marginalized communities and lending your voice. The important thing here for allies to remember is that in lending your voice, you don't want to take the focus away from the group that you are being an ally for. I will be honest, I have probably been guilty of this in my time as an ally. And I think that comes about because as an ally for the LGBTQ+ community, I am extremely passionate about that. It has really become a part of my DNA. And so sometimes I have to make sure that when I am being a voice for that community and I'm bringing my voice there, that I'm not overshadowing the community itself. And and remembering that me and my allyship is not the focus. What the focus is the community that is in need of allyship and the community that I hopefully am being an ally for. Championing others even in the face of adversity. What that means is being willing to speak up to perhaps have the hard conversations. If you hear someone saying something that you know is inappropriate, being willing to stand up and say, you know what, that really is offensive, or maybe pulling them aside and saying, you know, can we talk about a little bit more about why you thought it was okay to say that in the workplace or in someone's presence? And that's where we're talking about addressing biases in the workplace. What you want to be able to do is hopefully influence folks to maybe take another look at how they are not looking at their unconscious bias, or perhaps help them shine a light so that they can begin to look at what unconscious biases they may have. And quite frankly, sometimes it's shining a light on biases that are pretty blatant. But as a champion, and having moved up through the ERG, the ABCs of allyship, as a champion, this is something that champions should be willing and able to do. Another thing, you need to stay current on equality issues. You know, what's happening in the world? Where can your allyship perhaps be used publicly to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do you support candidates who stand for and vote positively for equal rights? You want to coach and recruit other allies. Now, I know that as allies, sometimes it can be difficult to have time to do all this. And I don't want this to come across as, okay, if you're going to become an ally and you're going to become an ally for multiple communities, then, you know, that's going to be all that you do. That's not the case at all. This can be done at whatever pace you or your allies need to do this. So if someone is an ally and they remain in that A of ABCs of allyship, that's fine. They don't have to move forward and get to the point where they become a champion. I think another thing that people need to recognize, and it's something I've had to recognize myself, is I might not be able to be an ally or a champion to every single community right now. But what I am doing is I am trying in my journey on allyship to determine what it is that I need to do as an ally for other communities in addition to the LGBTQ+ community. So who needs allies? Well, LGBTQ+ people need straight allies, women need male allies, people of color need white allies, women need to be allies for each other. LGBTQ+ people need to be allies for all the other letters of the community. People with disabilities need allies. People with mental health issues need allies. Veterans need allies. So many people need allies. People in places of power need to be allies for people who have no power. Ryan, I like what you said. Everybody needs allies. And helping people understand as an ally what it is that they need to do is a really important piece of getting your allies. So when we're talking about recruiting allies, some of the best ways to recruit allies.
Aimee, can I pause you for a second?
Sure.
It looks like we're having some issues with Zoom and it's going to kick us out in less than a minute.
Okay.
So if everyone can rejoin the Zoom, I'm sorry to do this. I'm sorry for the technical.
No worries.
But I think it's going to kick us out. So I'll just start a new meeting, same
Okay.
Zoom link.
Okay, will do.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Okay. If you can make me co-host again so I can go back to share my screen.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. 1, 2. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
We are.
Okay, great. All right, so what we were going to talk about are the best ways to recruit allies. I mentioned this before, and I really can't tell you how important it is. You just have to let them know that they're needed. You need to make them feel welcome, and you need to let them know what you need from them. I know this sounds simple, but sometimes folks just don't, I guess, think about it in these terms. But allies want to know that they're needed. They want to know that they're welcome, and they want to know that they can do something to help. And it really is that simple. And one thing that I think folks need to think about when it comes to allyship, especially when we're talking about ERGs, is making space for everyone. One of the things that became very apparent for me when George Floyd was murdered and so much was happening within the Black community. And of course, folks were like, how can we be allies and how can we help the Black community? I think one of the things that sometimes ERGs might forget is because ERGs want to be inclusive, they feel like they have to include allies all the time in meetings and things like that. What I suggest that folks do is think about it like this. Think about creating a safe space and a brave space. One of the things that I heard from, we actually hosted, ELA hosted an event right after George Floyd's murder, when everybody was, ERGs were trying to figure out, specifically Black professionals group, Black ERGs were trying to figure out what they were going to do and how they were going to respond. And one of the things that we heard were things like, we just need to talk as a community and be able to process this and process how it is impacting us as a community, impacting us as individuals. And we really don't need allies as part of that conversation. So that is when I think it's really important to have that safe space for your communities that are represented by your ERG to be able to have that safe space conversation where allies are not invited. And then after you've had those safe space conversations, then you can have a brave space conversation and invite allies into the conversation. And so I know that from an ERG perspective and from an allyship perspective, we talk about, we want to be all inclusive. We want to include allies. We want allies to feel welcomed. You can do that, and you can still have a safe space for your ERGs to come together as a community and talk as a community and process and work on things together as a community. So safe and brave space are two things I'd like to, or two concepts I'd like to leave with you today, as far as things, when we're talking about allyship, it doesn't have to mean allies are there all the time. So one of the things that I've seen with allyship is how it's evolved. I think many of us know of or have heard of, maybe we heard of it as a child, the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. When it comes to allyship, that's really not where we are anymore. We're really with the platinum rule. We need to treat people the way they want to be treated. And that is a huge distinction. And I think it's really something that we need to explore when it comes to allyship. And as a matter of fact, I am going to be exploring that. I'm writing a book on the platinum rule of allyship. And so I would like to ask those of you who are on the call and on our session today, if you want to put in chat, or if you want to come off of mute, I'm good with either. And what do you need from your allies? So what is it from, as a community, what is it the Black community might need from their allies that is not something that was we specifically talked about in the ABCs of allyship? I want to hear about the nuances of that and how can allies be better equipped to be an ally and a champion for specific marginalized or underrepresented groups based on what the needs of that specific group are. So I'm going to open it up to you folks on the call. What is it that you need from your allies? Understanding.
Feel free to come off mute.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Here I can. One thing that I found, one of the nuanced things that I found was when someone is more invested and more mad than me about the injustice they see, I would like to be trusted in my experience when I'm saying this situation may not be what it seems like it is. I had that in a new employment space, and I was one of 2 Black women in the office space, and the other person was having a problem that really wasn't centered around their race or their identity in any way. But because they had made statements, the allies in the office wanted to rally to their rescue in a way. You know, they wanted to help. And so they kind of got pulled in to something that didn't have anything to do with it. And I really felt very muted when I was saying, this isn't what it looks like. And, you know, I have an experience too. I can share my experience with you so we can look at, there's a contrast here. I'm not having the same issues as this person based on these specific complaints that they're making. I think we need to look deeper. And it really caused our agency a lot of problems, but it was just a really tough feeling for me because these are people who have done a lot of anti-racism work and a lot of allyship work. And so they felt, I work in an advocacy center. We're all advocates by trade. They really felt very dedicated. And my thing was, you can't be more mad than me about what's happening to me. Trust my experience and my response to it. And I'll let you know when I could use that, you know, when I could use you to stand in the gap for me, but I just didn't feel like I had a voice in that situation.
That's a great example. That's a great example. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. But that is a perfect example of how allies, there are nuances that we need to help allies become aware of. And that is a great example of how, you know, people want to be treated. We have to treat people the way they want to be treated, not the way we think they want to be treated. Any other ally stories or any other ideas about what you need from your allies? Oh, thank you so much for sharing. That was wonderful. Well, before I go into full question mode, I would like to ask everybody on the call what I would like to do in my plan with my book on the Platinum Rule of Allyship is I want to share stories like that. I want to hear stories from people about how allies really stepped in and it was a great experience. And I want to hear stories about how, you know, allies really missed the mark. And I want to hear stories just like Althea, Althea, I'd love to include your story if you'd be willing. You can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Aimee Broadhurst, and also Coach Aimee at inclusivespace.com. I am available with that email, and I would love to hear your stories because I think by telling these stories, it can help us really move allyship from this golden rule kind of thought process, really moving it into this platinum rule. And I think it will help allies become more aware. And I think it will help create better allies for each of the communities that need allies. All right, well, I'm going to open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions? And it doesn't have to be just a question for me. If you have just a general question you'd like for the group to kind of chat about. Thanks, Meredith.
Again, feel free to come off mute, ask any questions. This is meant to be kind of the open dialogue portion of today's event.
Great.
Hey, Amy.
Hey, Ryan.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hope you are.
Great. This has been very helpful. So I'll share just a little bit about myself. I'm with Xerox. I am the president of our LGBTQ employee resource group. And within that ERG, I find it very easy to locate and find our allies, or it seems to be from my perspective, which is fantastic.
Yes.
I also hold an executive role with our Women's Alliance, as we call them, Manbassador. So we are our male allies. In that space, I'm finding it a little bit more challenging to educate our male employees on how they can, or why they should become a Manbassador and support the Women's Alliance, as well as the overall women at Xerox. So I find that to be a little bit challenging as I work through that in a leadership role as a male ally for our women's group. The why join and what can I do now? And you did touch on a few of what can be done, but if you'd like to share anything else that might be able to help me in that space, it would be appreciated.
Sure. And thanks for that question, Ryan. I'll tell you that you're not alone. I think sometimes when it comes to male allyship, some men just don't see it. And I think some ways to help them see that, quite frankly, would be storytelling. I mean, having women share their experiences and either how a male ally helped them or how a male ally really missed the mark. Because I think sometimes you have to make that head-heart connection. I think sometimes you can make that connection if you have men who have girls as children, to help them make that connection to, okay, this is really what we're talking about. These women are someone's daughter, and how would you want someone to show up for your daughter? But I find that what's really beneficial is we used to do these things called training and panels. And so it would be a little bit of training up front on, and this was of course in the LGBTQ plus space, but you can use it across any marginalized group when you're looking for allies, is a little bit of training on, what it is to be perhaps a male ally and what that looks like. And then we had folks who would come in and share their stories. And then we would leave some time for folks to ask questions. And the impact that those had on people and the number of aha moments that it created was well worth the time spent.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. Storytelling really seems to be the way of the now in getting messages across and hearing personal stories you can really resonate with. So that's very helpful. Thank you. And putting it into that concept and
Yep.
Together. So thank you very much.
Sure. Other questions, other thoughts? Have any of you done anything in the ally space that has been really successful and you want to share that? Okay. Well, I really appreciate all of you coming today. And allyship is a big thing for me, that and employee resource groups, and helping employee resource group leaders be able to balance their day job with their passion job. And I really am serious that I'm very interested in hearing ally stories and the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever you'd be willing to share. So if you have things like that that you'd like to share, please reach out to me, and I'll schedule some time to have a conversation with you, and would love to be able to include as many stories as I can in my book.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aimee. And I'm just echoing everyone in the chat. This was awesome. This was incredibly helpful. In the follow-up, I will send out Aimee's information as well as her LinkedIn. So contact her if you'd like to share your story, with her book. And then I'll also send you some more information on CHESI and then the ERG Leadership Alliance. So thank you all again for joining. Aimee, thank you so much for this content. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Aimee.
Thanks.